By the winter of 1944, the battlefields of the Western Front had become a graveyard for American tanks. In the grim ledger of armored warfare, the equation was brutally simple and profoundly demoralizing for the men of the U.S. Armored divisions. On one side stood the German Panzerwaffe, armed with its menagerie of steel predators, the elegant, deadly Panther and the fearsome, indomitable Tiger. On the other side stood the American M4 Sherman, a good tank fighting a great tank's war, and the M5 Stuart, a light tank so hopelessly outclassed it was little more than a death trap. The primary role of the American light tank, the M5 Stuart, was supposed to be reconnaissance and screening. It was a small, fast, nimble vehicle, designed to scout ahead of the main armored columns, to probe enemy defenses, and to fight other light vehicles. Against infantry and unarmored targets, it was effective. But against the German Panzers, it was a tragic joke. Its tiny 37mm gun was utterly incapable of penetrating the armor of a Panther or a Tiger at any range. Its own armor was so thin that a glancing hit from a German heavy machine gun could be lethal, and a direct hit from a Panzer's main cannon would not just destroy the Stuart, it would vaporize it, often leaving nothing behind but a blackened crater and a few scattered pieces of twisted metal. The American tankers, with their characteristic gallows humor, had a host of grim nicknames for the Stuart. They called it the Honey, a nickname given by the British that had turned bitterly ironic. More often, they simply called it a Purple Heart box, a near-guaranteed ticket to a casualty medal. To send a Stuart into a fight against a German Panther was not a tactical decision, it was a suicide mission. This glaring deficiency created a dangerous tactical gap for the Americans. The Sherman, while a capable medium tank, was a large and relatively clumsy vehicle, ill-suited for the tight confines of forested or urban terrain, or for the nimble dance of reconnaissance. The Stuart, which was supposed to perform these roles, was simply too vulnerable to survive on the modern battlefield. The U.S. Army was fighting with one hand tied behind its back. They needed a new light tank, a machine that could combine the speed and agility of the Stuart with a weapon powerful enough to actually defend itself, a weapon that could, if cornered, bite back and maybe even kill one of the German big cats. The need was desperate, but the solution had been in development for years, born from the hard lessons learned in the deserts of North Africa. The engineers and designers at Cadillac, a division of General Motors, had been tasked with creating the next-generation American light tank. Their creation, which began to roll off the assembly lines in mid-1944, was a machine that looked and felt completely different from any American tank that had come before it. It was the M24, and it would soon be christened the Chaffee, after the pioneering father of the U.S. Armored Force Adna R. Chaffee Jr. To the casual eye, the Chaffee was simply a smaller, more elegant version of a Sherman. But to a trained tanker, it was a revolutionary leap forward. Every single aspect of its design was a direct response to the failings of the Stuart. It had smoothly sloped armor, inspired by the Panther, which provided a far greater degree of protection without a massive increase in weight. Its suspension system, using torsion bars instead of the Sherman's clunky vertical volutes, gave it a lower profile and a remarkably smooth, quiet ride, allowing it to move across the battlefield with a stealth that was unheard of for an American tank. But its most significant innovation was its armament. Gone was the Stuart's pathetic 37mm pea shooter. In its place was a brand new, lightweight 75mm cannon. This was not the same low-velocity 75mm gun found on the early Shermans. It was a specially designed weapon, adapted from the powerful cannon used on the B-25 Mitchell bomber. It was light enough to be mounted in a small tank's turret, but it fired the same potent ammunition as its bigger brother, giving the Chaffee the theoretical ability to knock out a Panzer IV and, from the flank or rear, even a Panther. When the first M24 Chafees began to arrive at the front lines, in the bitter cold of December 1944, just in time for the German Ardennes offensive, the reaction from the veteran American tankers was one of cautious optimism. It was certainly better than a Stuart. But their optimism was tempered by the brutal reality of the war. They were still facing the same steel monsters. The Panthers' long 75mm gun and the Tiger's mighty 88mm could still kill this new light tank from a mile away. The Chaffee was an improvement, a significant one, but it was still a light tank in a heavyweight's world. The reaction from the German Panzer commanders, who first encountered the M24, was far less respectful. To them, it was just another in a long line of inferior American designs. They saw a tank that was smaller than a Sherman, with what they knew to be thinner armor. They dismissed it. To a German ace, sitting confidently in his 45-ton Panther, this new little American tank was an amusing curiosity, a slightly more challenging target than a Stuart, but a guaranteed kill nonetheless. They laughed at it. They saw it as a desperate, inadequate attempt by the Americans to plug a hole in their armored doctrine. Their arrogance was in some ways justified. In a head-to-head, daylight confrontation in an open field, a Panther would almost always defeat a Chaffee. The German tank's gun was more powerful, and its frontal armor was still effectively immune to the Chaffee's 75mm cannon. But the war was not always fought in open fields in broad daylight. And the Chaffee possessed a set of secret advantages that did not appear on any technical specification sheet, advantages that the German commanders, blinded by their own doctrine of brute force and superior firepower, failed to recognize. The Chaffee was quiet. Its advanced torsion bar suspension and rubber bush tracks made it whisper quiet compared to the loud, clanking Panthers and Tigers. It was incredibly nimble, with a high power-to-weight ratio that allowed it to accelerate and maneuver with the speed of an armored car. And critically, for the battles that were about to unfold in the dark, snow-filled forests of the Ardennes, it was equipped with superb vision devices for its commander and crew. The German commanders saw a little tank with a weaker gun and thinner armor. They saw a victim. They failed to see a silent, fast and sharp-eyed predator that was perfectly designed for a different kind of fight. They were about to learn, in a series of shocking and violent nocturnal encounters, that the rules of the game change when the sun goes down. They had laughed at the little Chaffee. They would soon learn to fear it, not for what it was, but for what it could do in the dark, where its weaknesses were hidden, and its secret strengths could be unleashed with deadly effect. The M24 Chaffee's baptism by fire came in the crucible of America's greatest battle of the war, the Ardennes offensive. The brand new tanks were rushed from depots in France, often with their factory paint still fresh, and thrown directly into the desperate fighting to halt the German surprise attack. They were initially assigned to reconnaissance squadrons, their intended role, but the chaos of the Battle of the Bulge meant that every tank, regardless of its size, was now a frontline combatant. One of the first units to use the Chaffee in significant numbers was the 740th Tank Battalion, a unit that was hastily attached to the 82nd Airborne Division to help defend the critical northern shoulder of the German Bulge. It was here, in the dark, snow-choked forests near towns like La Gleize and Stoumont, that the unique character of the new tank began to reveal itself. The German armored force in this sector was the elite Kampfgruppe Piper, a spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, equipped with the newest and most fearsome German tanks, including the monstrous 70-ton King Tiger. The German tankers were aggressive, highly experienced, and utterly confident in the superiority of their machines. They would use the cover of the dense forests and the frequent snowstorms to launch powerful surprise attacks on American positions. In a conventional daylight fight, the Chafees were still at a severe disadvantage. Their 75mm guns, while a massive improvement over the Stuart, still struggled to penetrate the frontal armor of the Panthers and Tigers that formed the core of Piper's force. The American tankers quickly learned that a head-to-head confrontation was suicide. But they also began to learn that their new tanks possessed a set of soft advantages that were perfect for the brutal, close-quarters fighting in the Ardennes. The first advantage was its stealth. The German tanks, particularly the heavy Panther and Tiger, were notoriously loud. Their overlapping steel road wheels and complex suspension systems created an immense amount of noise, a symphony of squealing, grinding, and clanking that would announce their presence from a mile away. The Chaffee, in stark contrast, was a ghost. Its rubber bush tracks and advanced torsion bar suspension made it incredibly quiet. It could move through the dense, snow-covered forests with a stealth that was deeply unsettling to the Germans. American Chaffee crews quickly developed new tactics based on this advantage. They became hunters, not brawlers. They would use their speed and quietness to move into hidden, flanking ambush positions along the narrow forest roads. They would lie in wait, engines off, the crew listening intently in the freezing silence for the telltale, rumbling approach of a German armored column. The second and most critical advantage was the Chaffee's superb crew visibility and handling. The commander's cupola offered excellent 360-degree vision, and the turret's powered traverse was fast and responsive. The tank was agile, able to quickly pivot and accelerate. This allowed the Chaffee to operate as a nimble predator in an environment where the larger, more powerful German tanks felt clumsy and constrained. The Panther, with its long overhanging cannon, found it difficult to maneuver in the dense woods, its turret traverse notoriously slow. The Chaffee could literally run rings around it. It was during the long, dark nights of the Belgian winter that these advantages were magnified into a truly decisive, war-winning edge. Night fighting in World War II was a terrifying, chaotic, and generally avoided affair. But the desperate nature of the Battle of the Bulge forced both sides into round-the-clock combat. And it was here that the German tankers' arrogance collided with the Chaffee's hidden strengths. The German philosophy of tank design had prioritized firepower and protection above all else. Their sights, while excellent for long-range daylight engagements, were not optimized for the murky, low-light conditions of a snowy night. The crews were often buttoned up, their vision restricted to narrow slits. The American designers of the Chaffee, however, had created a tank that was far more user-friendly, with better periscopes and a commander's station that allowed for superior situational awareness, even in the dark. A typical encounter would unfold with a terrifying, almost supernatural pattern. A column of German Panther tanks, confident in the cover of darkness and their own superior armor, would be grinding its way down a narrow, snow-covered road. Their crews, peering through their narrow vision slits, would see nothing but the dark, silent forest. Hidden just off the road, nestled in a thicket of pine trees, a pair of M24 Chaffees would be waiting, their crews scanning the darkness. They would hear the Germans coming long before they could be seen. The American commander, using his superior vision devices, would be the first to spot the dark, hulking shapes of the Panthers against the white snow. He would not order his gunner to fire at the thick frontal armor. That was a fool's game. Instead, he would wait, his heart pounding, as the lead Panther drew abreast of his position. Then, he would give the order. The Chaffee's quiet engine would roar to life. The tank would dart out from its hiding place, not in front of the Panther, but to its side. The German commander, his vision restricted, would be caught completely by surprise. He would hear the sudden roar of an engine from a direction he didn't expect, and frantically try to traverse his slow, cumbersome turret. But it was too late. The Chaffee's gunner, aiming at the Panther's thin side armor from a range of less than 50 yards, would fire. The 75mm shell, which would have bounced harmlessly off the front, would now slice through the side of the Panther as if it were cheese, often striking the ammunition racks and causing a catastrophic instantaneous explosion. Before the rest of the German column could even react, the Chaffee would use its incredible agility to reverse back into the darkness of the forest and disappear, leaving behind a burning wreck. To the surviving German tankers, it was a ghost attack. They had been killed by an enemy they never saw, a whisper in the woods that struck with the speed of a striking snake and then vanished. These small nocturnal ambushes began to happen all along the front. The Chaffee crews became masters of this new kind of warfare. They were no longer just a reconnaissance force. They had become the designated night hunters, the silent killers of the forest. The German commanders, who had initially laughed at the little tank, were now facing a new and terrifying threat, one that did not appear on their intelligence reports. Their steel beasts were the kings of the daylight battlefield, but the night, they were discovering, belonged to the Chaffee. The legend of the Chaffee as a nocturnal predator was not forged in a single grand battle, but in a series of small, vicious, and terrifying encounters that took place in the frozen darkness of the Ardennes. But if one moment could be said to have cemented its reputation, it was the Devil's Dance that occurred on Christmas night, 1944, near the Belgian village of Mannheim. By this point in the Battle of the Bulge, the German offensive had stalled, and the fighting had devolved into a brutal slugging match for control of key crossroads and villages. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, one of the most feared and fanatical units in the entire German military, was attempting a powerful night attack to break through the American lines. Their spearhead consisted of a company of Panther tanks, the pride of the Panzerwaffe, commanded by veteran officers who were masters of armored warfare. Their plan was to use the cover of a snowstorm and the darkness to achieve a decisive breakthrough. Opposing them was a mixed American force, including elements of the 7th Armored Division and a reconnaissance platoon from the 740th Tank Battalion, equipped with 5 of the new M24 Chaffees. The American position was precarious. They were outnumbered, and in a straight-up fight, their Shermans and tank destroyers would be hard-pressed to stop the Panthers. The 5 Chaffees were seen as little more than a screening force, a tripwire. The German attack began just after midnight, a rumbling wave of steel and engine noise grinding forward through the swirling snow. The Panther commanders were confident. Night fighting negated the biggest American advantage, their air power, and played to the strengths of the Panthers' superior gun and armor. They believed the Americans would break and run. The commander of the American Chaffee platoon, a young lieutenant named John W. Collins, knew that a direct confrontation was suicide. He had listened to the stories from other Chaffee crews and had developed a deep respect for his tank's unique strengths. He gave his men a simple, audacious order that went against every conventional rule of tank warfare: don't hold the line. We're not a wall, we're ghosts. We hit and we run, Let them come to us. As the lead German Panthers entered the outskirts of the village, they were met not by a solid line of American fire, but by an unnerving silence. The German commanders grew cautious, their crews peering nervously into the dark, snow-filled streets. Then, the dance began. From a hidden alleyway, the first Chaffee roared to life. It darted out, its 75mm gun barking once, twice, firing at the thin rear armor of the last Panther in the column. The shells struck home, immobilizing the German tank and blocking the narrow road. Before the other Panthers could even traverse their turrets towards the threat, the Chaffee had reversed at high speed back into the darkness of another alley and vanished. The German column was thrown into chaos. The lead Panthers tried to advance, while the tanks in the rear were now trapped. Then, from a different direction, a second Chaffee appeared. It fired 2 quick shots at the exposed side of another Panther, then disappeared behind a building. For the German tank commanders, the situation was a nightmare. They were being attacked by an enemy they could not see, an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. Their powerful tanks were trapped in the narrow village streets, their slow turret traverse and poor visibility making them clumsy giants. The Chaffees, in contrast, were using their incredible speed and agility to perfection. They would pop out from behind a building, fire a shot at a vulnerable flank, and then vanish before the Germans could bring their powerful guns to bear. It was not a battle, it was a lethal ballet. The Chaffees were not trying to slug it out, they were using hit-and-run tactics, a death-by-1,000 cuts approach. They would appear, strike, and disappear, their quiet engines and nimble handling, allowing them to use the ruined village as their personal hunting ground. The German radio nets filled with panicked, confused chatter. How many American tanks were there? A full battalion? They couldn't believe that this level of chaos was being caused by just a handful of little light tanks. The climax of the engagement came when 2 Chaffees managed to trap a Panther in a pincer movement. One Chaffee appeared in front of the Panther, drawing its attention and causing the German gunner to focus on it. As the Panther's massive turret slowly began to turn, the second Chaffee, which had been hiding in a bombed-out barn, raced out and slammed a 75mm shell into the Panther's side engine compartment from a range of less than 30 feet. The Panther erupted in flames. By dawn, the German attack had been completely broken. The streets of Mannheim were littered with the burning wrecks of several Panthers and other German armored vehicles. The 2nd SS Panzer Division had been stopped dead in its tracks, not by a superior force of heavy tanks, but by 5 little Chaffees that had refused to fight by the rules. They had outmaneuvered, outthought, and ultimately outfought the pride of the Panzerwaffe. The story of the Devil's Dance at Mannheim spread like wildfire through the American Armored Corps. It was a stunning validation of the Chaffee's potential. It proved that in the right hands and under the right conditions, this little tank could kill giants. The German commanders, who had once laughed at the M24, were now forced to issue new intelligence bulletins, warning their troops about this new and dangerous threat, especially during night operations. The Chaffee's reputation was sealed. It was no longer just a replacement for the Stuart. It was a specialized weapon, a nocturnal predator, a ghost that haunted the forests and villages of the front. The German tankers had learned a harsh and bloody lesson. They had judged the Chaffee by its size and its armor thickness, by the conventional metrics of their own rigid doctrine. They had failed to account for its stealth, its speed, and its ability to turn the darkness itself into a weapon. They had come to the Ardennes to fight a battle of brute force, and had instead found themselves in a deadly dance with an enemy who was simply too quick, too quiet, and too clever to be caught. The Battle of the Bulge was the beginning, not the end, of the M24 Chaffee's legend. As the Allied armies pushed into the heart of Germany in the spring of 1945, the Chaffee came into its own, proving its worth time and time again in the fast-moving battles that characterized the final months of the war in Europe. The lessons learned in the frozen forests of the Ardennes were now standard operating procedure for Chaffee crews across the front. They became the designated trailblazers, the eyes and ears of the armored divisions. While the heavier Shermans and Pershings formed the solid fist of the main advance, the Chaffees would fan out, operating as a fast, fluid screen. They would race ahead to seize key bridges, scout enemy defensive positions, and hunt down German command posts. Their speed and agility made them perfect for this role, allowing them to exploit breakthroughs and sow chaos in the enemy's rear areas. But it was their reputation as giant killers that truly defined them. The German Panzerwaffe was a shadow of its former self, crippled by fuel shortages and catastrophic losses, but it was still dangerous. The remaining Panthers, Tigers, and King Tigers, often dug in as defensive pillboxes, were still capable of inflicting terrible damage. For the Chaffee crews, seeking out and destroying these last dangerous remnants of the German armored beast became a point of honor. They honed their hit-and-run tactics to a fine art. They would work in concert with infantry and tank destroyers, using their stealth and speed to get into flanking positions that were impossible for the heavier tanks to reach. A Chaffee crew would sneak into a ruined German town at night, identify the location of a hidden Panther, and then radio its position to the heavy artillery or an M36 tank destroyer, which would deliver the killing blow. The Chaffee was not just a killer in its own right, it was a spotter for the rest of the team, a vital part of a combined arms system. The German tankers, who had once laughed, now developed a deep and healthy respect for the little tank. They learned to fear its quiet approach and its sudden, savage attacks from unexpected directions. The Chaffee's presence in a sector meant that no flank was safe, no road was secure, and the darkness was no longer a shield. The Chaffee's service in World War II was relatively short, limited to the final 6 months of the war in Europe, but its impact was significant. It had filled a critical tactical gap in the American armored force, providing a reconnaissance vehicle that could actually fight. It had proven that in armored warfare, brute force and heavy armor were not the only metrics of success. Speed, stealth, and tactical flexibility were weapons in their own right, and the Chaffee possessed them in abundance. Its legacy, however, would extend far beyond the battlefields of 1945. The Chaffee was such a successful and well-balanced design that it became one of the most widely used and influential light tanks of the post-war era. While the mighty Shermans and Pershings were soon replaced by newer designs, the Chaffee continued to serve for decades. It fought in the Korean War, where its agility once again proved invaluable in the rugged, mountainous terrain. It was sold to dozens of Allied nations, seeing service in armies all across the world, from France to South Vietnam to Taiwan. The design principles pioneered in the Chaffee, the use of a powerful gun in a light chassis, the emphasis on crew visibility and handling, and the advanced torsion bar suspension, became the blueprint for future generations of light tanks and reconnaissance vehicles. Its influence can still be seen in armored vehicles used by modern armies today. The story of the M24 Chaffee is the ultimate David and Goliath tale of the Second World War. It is a story about how a weapon's true worth cannot always be measured in the thickness of its armor or the caliber of its gun. The German tank commanders, products of a doctrine that idolized size and power, made the fatal mistake of underestimating their opponent based on a superficial assessment. They laughed at the little tank, because it did not conform to their own rigid definition of a worthy adversary. They learned too late that the Chaffee was not designed to fight their war. It was designed to fight its own, a war of speed, stealth, and cunning. It was a war fought in the dark, on the flanks, and in the spaces between the enemy's strengths. The German Panthers were kings of the daylight duel, but the Chaffee was the master of the nocturnal ambush. It was a silent killer, a whisper in the woods, a ghost that had haunted the final, desperate dreams of the Panzerwaffe. The laughter had died on Christmas night in a frozen Belgian village, replaced by the fire and thunder of a legend being born.